Well, hi there. This is Stacey Barr, and with me is Ayça Tümer Arıkan, who started her membership in the PuMP online program nearly 2 years ago, very quickly got her PuMP certification, and very thankfully has stayed in contact with me over this time to let me know how her implementations of PuMP were going, and in particular to let me know how they went in a laboratory and sterilisation equipment factory. Now, Ayca facilitated PuMP to help a couple of teams there to get some meaningful measures of performance. Now, she's based in the city of Ankara in Turkey and operates as a freelance measurement consultant. And I'm so glad that she has said this to me. She also has the intention to one day be one of my licensed PuMP partners too. And also, like me, Ayca's background is as a statistician, and she's got nearly 15 years of work experience in measurement. So she's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience in this field. Ayca's mission now is to help companies use measurement correctly as a tool to become high-performing organisations. So Ayca, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experiences with PuMP.
Well, I thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to talk to you here.
It's brilliant. So how about we start, Ayca, with just a little bit more about the factory that you're working with and your role working there.
Okay. Well, the factory is a very well-established organization, actually. They manufacture a really broad range of equipments in the medical sector. And they also export their products to more than 100 countries, in addition to their sales in Turkey here. And so, as a new freelance consultant in the area of performance measurement, this was my first PuMP implementation. They were my first client. So at the same time, I facilitated 2 PuMP pilot projects, which was the request of their general manager. So as an outside facilitator, I guided the implementation of 2 pilots, and I followed the steps of PuMP with the available templates that you have provided.
Lovely. And what brought you to PuMP in the first place, Ayca? How long have you been using it now?
Well, actually, you said something about it, but I can still give a brief history.
Please.
I started my career in 2003 as a project tracking expert in a software development company in defense industry. And then later in the company, my responsibility increased from project level to organization level, and we established a wellness scorecard in the organization. The company was really strongly believed in the power of measurement, actually, but and I do so. But for a while, even though we used several instruments of measurement like control charts, so we defined our measures, we were really using measures in that company, but something was wrong. We dealt with many problems about measurement. I mean, like how the goals were cascaded in the lower levels, how the integrity of the data was not secure, and how the measures were used and reported. We were having several problems, and I was really not happy working there for the last few years of my working time. As a measurement person, you can imagine how is that happening.
Very much.
And so I decided to leave my company for that reason and some other reasons. And so I was in search for doing something on my own. I had experience in measurement. That was all I knew. And so I started researching and reading. And this is when I first saw the name of PuMP in the Wellness Scorecard Institute's website. As a measurement person, of course, it immediately took my attention. I started reading, and I found your name. I started following your blog. I read what you have written, and I decided to take the online training of PuMP Blueprint. So I got my certificate in February 2017, and immediately I loved PuMP, and it's practical and it detail leads the way to good performance measurement. So as you said, now my mission is to share this knowledge to different companies in my country. And I really want to be a PuMP partner someday. Until I've fulfilled the requirements, I'm trying to get jobs and increase my experience in this area. So
That's great. I'm excited about that.
So my first job, I took it in November 2017 from this factory that we will talk about. And immediately I established my own company. And now I work alone. I work freelance. And I have given the name ProMeas, the process coming from process measurement, to my company, because I have a dream in maybe someday I may establish a team of my own. So currently, I continue facilitating the full implementation of PuMP in the same factory. So it has almost been 10 months since I started doing this, starting to facilitate PuMP in practice. And I'm happy to say that recently I took another job from a software development company, and their pilot will start this November. So I'm really very excited about it also.
Maybe we'll get to have another interview with you, Ayca, about that one as well.
Why not?
So what we're going to talk about together now is looking at the factory and focusing mostly on one of the teams in the factory and how you move them through each of the 8 steps of PuMP. But before we do that, could you tell us a little bit more about the measures teams that you facilitated, and maybe start with the goals that they wanted to measure?
Okay. 2 pilots was run in the same time, parallel, and one was for the production team, production processes, and one for the technical service team. So in order to select their goals for the pilots, first we did the planning for the goal selection, and we did a meeting with the general manager, their deputy general manager, production manager, and technical services managers together. Before the meeting, I gave them a selection criteria. I wanted them to select a goal that is really important to focus on, and I said it shall be part of the company's vision, aligned to their strategies. So we viewed their potential goals, they prepared something, and they prioritized the goals, and then finally they selected one goal for production and one goal for the technical service. And they were basically the problems they recently dealt with. So for the technical service group, they were spending too much time and money for deep freeze products. This is one of their product groups. So they selected reduce the time spent for and the cost of technical service for deep freeze type of products as the goal for the pilot. The production team, on the other hand, due to recent regulations, several input items and production methods for their machining process have changed, and this caused the time of the process to increase. Machining process is actually one of their production processes, which is used to manufacture several types of pieces for their end products. So this was the problem they were dealing with at the time. So they selected the goal to reduce the time spent for machining production process for this pilot. So this is how we started.
That's great. The choice of just one goal per team is something that I always recommend people do, because the first implementation of PuMP can be a little bit overwhelming if you try to measure every goal. So that was brilliant that you started with those 2 very clear goals for the team. Now, we are going to walk through the 8 steps of the PuMP process to see how you helped these teams to develop measures and use the measures for those goals. And for everybody watching who is a member of our PuMP community, you will immediately recognize this flowchart of the 8 steps of PuMP. If anyone's watching this and isn't familiar with PuMP yet, there'll be a link below the video that will take you to where you can read more about it, but it's basically staceybarr.com/about/PuMP. pump, and that's where you can read a bit more about this process. So Ayça, what we're going to do now is go one step at a time and talk a little bit about how your measures teams got through this. So let's start with step one, the first step in PuMP, and it is understanding measurement's purpose. What impact did the PuMP diagnostic have for your measures team members when you did this step?
Well, actually, most of the content was new to most of the personnel because they didn't have any systematic performance measurement approach before. What they did was tracking only a few basic measures like productivity, financial performance, on a very infrequent basis, like semi-annual or annual at the organization level. So they looked at several figures and tables monthly, but they had no graphs which were used to track the performance in time. They also had a few department level objectives that were not linked to organization strategies. So after the diagnostic session, the general manager told me that they were not aware of most of the things that we have discussed during the session. So basically, the session increased their awareness about the concepts of good measurement practice. I also believe that they gave honest scores for their current implementation, and they highlighted the areas for improvement, as you see in the graph. Most of the areas were below or just in the 4-point region. And but later I understood that the concepts were not clearly understood during diagnostic session by some of the team members, especially the blue collar. They were not aware of anything related to measurement. They never ever measured anything related to their work before. So things became clearer in their heads as the sessions progressed. And I noticed how they increased their knowledge. But I can say that they were all motivated and excited at the end of the session. And about the projects, they believe that the projects will be beneficial to the company. But maybe in the later implementations, if the audience is so unaware of the concepts, I can divide the diagnostic session into the sessions following and complete the whole diagnostic session at the end of the pilot, if this is the first implementation. Because they later told me that they left with question marks in their heads, especially the blue collar workers. So this was my lessons learned after the first session of pilots, first step of the pilot implementation.
That's encouraging, really, for a lot of other people who are working with teams that have never had any experience in measurement, that at least this is a discussion at step one that can start their journey to learning more. We don't have to expect that after step one they know everything they need to know.
Yeah. But maybe I thought only explaining some basic terminology, emphasizing that the measures will not be used for judging people, and explaining the process steps may be enough in such cases that I experienced. Because in each step of PuMP, I also give orientations and explain each step, and I can just penetrate diagnostic knowledge in those, and we can give points, scores, just completing the first pilot. Maybe I'm thinking about it, but I really want to know what you think about it.
I like your idea of taking some of the diagnostic, the relevant parts of the diagnostic, and bringing them into the subsequent steps of PuMP. I think that would be a really clever way of doing it. But I always think that PuMP works best when we don't think too much about things and just let, maybe each time we do an implementation, we might test or change a little thing and see how it works. But generally, nobody's going to understand everything at the very beginning, and we just need to help them feel confident that it's going to become clear as they go.
Okay.
Okay, so you got it sounds like you got the outcome that step one in PuMP is supposed to get, which is you got them feeling excited or at least curious about continuing and giving this a try. And that means you managed to get them to go to step two in PuMP, which we call
sure.
mapping measurable results. Ayça, could you give us some examples of how the teams improved the measurability or how measurable their goals were and how they mapped the relationships between the goals?
We first used Measurable to test templates of PuMP to clarify their goals at the beginning of the session. And then we flowcharted their process to cascade the process level goal to activity level. So we started with the selected operational goal for the technical service team. We are talking about that. We are focusing on technical service team. Their goal was to reduce the time spent for and the cost of technical service for deep freeze products. What we did was first we changed the language into results language. And then we split the goal into two, since it was multi-focus. It contained both time and the cost of the technical service process. So finally, what we got was two operational level performance results. The time of deep freeze products technical service is minimized, and the cost of deep freeze products technical service is minimized. You can see on the slide now. There were other goals also, like we can handle the technical service at the location of the customer. Our service partners can make repairs without our involvement. These were the goals that we cascaded from the operational level goal at the process level goal. What we did was we divided the goal into two. And then we evaluated this goal was linked to company strategy, and it was important enough to allocate budget for improvements. So during measurable to test step E, which was linking it to the strategy, we cascaded the operational goal to activity level by flow charting. We draw the process, technical service process that used in the deep freeze products on a board. So you were saying something?
Great. I was saying great. I think using flowcharting or process mapping to help with this thinking is just fantastic.
Yes, because they didn't cascade it before. So on the flowchart, I wanted them to highlight the steps that affect the time and cost of the process most. So they did that, and then they prioritized the problem areas. For example, for the deep freeze products, the most time-consuming and costly thing they did was to bring the product to the factory instead of giving the required service at the customer side. So they choose giving technical service at the customer side as an activity level goal under their operational goal. And finally, we mapped the goals on a result map and linked their cause and effect and show their cause and effect links on this map, as you can see in the slide. So we can handle the technical service for deep freeze products at the location of the customer. Directly affects the cost of deep freeze products technical service and the time spent for technical service for those products. So we show their linkage in this results map. They also wanted to transfer some of their time to service partners, which they think would decrease their cost also. So this is the other activity level goal that we have written.
That's great. And did the measures team, the technical services team, when they saw their results mapped like that with the cause effect links, did that help them be more clear about what this meant and how it would be useful for them?
It started to get clear, yes. Still, we are not talking about measures yet, but they visually seeing their targets, visually seeing their objectives on a graph like this was really inspiring. And they said, oh, I remember from the session. So that started to make sense, they said. And I think it increased their motivation for the following sessions. But I have to mention that in the production team session, this was a little bit harder than the technical service team. As I said before, this was the first time for them to attend to a study such like this. They were really unfamiliar to anything. So during the session, only the production manager was talking, and the team members were really silent. They only started talking if I directed a question toward one of them. And also they started talking when they saw the process, their own process on the board. And when we made their objectives visual, like we did in the technical service team, they really they really started to understand what was going on in that session.
That's great. I find that also, Ayça, in some teams, the manager does a lot of the talking, and it's probably more from habit than anything else. But
Maybe.
Some of these tools in PuMP do seem to help people talk and share and become a little bit more confident contributing, because it's really about ways to visually capture the things that they are the experts in, the things that they know.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so they had motivation then to go from step 2 in PuMP, where they ended up with clear and measurable results, to get to step 3 in PuMP, which is designing meaningful measures. So Ayça, how did that go? Can you give us an example of a measure design that the team did?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the hardest step in this session was writing objective evidences. Even though it seems so simple, it's really not. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for both teams, actually, because it's really easy to mix the spin-off results with the actual objective evidences. So we had to spend some time with the teams to make them understand what objective evidence really means and what it should be like. Then they were able to come up with some meaningful objective evidences, and then we designed several potential measures for them. As an example, I think we can talk about the measure they designed for the time of defreeze products technical service. This performance result, when we talk about it, it seems easy. And so when I asked them what would their objective evidences of minimizing the service time for defreeze products, they said we spent less man hours for defreeze products technical service. The time that product stays broken is less, etc. You can see them on the slide. So when we completed listing the objective evidences, they designed 4 potential performance measures for these. And after listing those potential measures, which were, for example, the average man hours spent for repairing defreeze products monthly, the average number of days between the failure reporting and product release to the customers, they scored them, the strength and feasibility perspectives. And we averaged their scores to come up with only one score for each criteria. Mm-hmm. And one of them was selected, which was the average number of days between the failure reporting and product release to the customers. So they named their measure as total service time for defreeze products. And the formula defined was that the average of the number of days between product release date and service request date, which are taken from the technical services given throughout a month. And later on, we changed the frequency of the measure from month to quarter, because we understood that it was not meaningful to take monthly averages, because not so many defreeze products service was requested during a month. So quarter would be a more meaningful frequency to measure this measure.
That makes a lot of sense. Often we don't know exactly the best frequency for a measure until we even have the data for it. But if the team knows that it's not that frequent, then it's absolutely fine to change it like you did from monthly to quarterly. That's great.
So with the production team, I have to mention something different here. As you know, I said they were a more silent team, and this third session was really more difficult than the second, because when it comes to talking about objective evidences and designing measures, they were more quiet than the second session. So I think this session was not very successful, because only production manager came up with several ideas, and the rest of the group were not happy with the result. They were not sure about the measures and about the frequency of the measures. And my weakness in this session was that I didn't know their process much. We drew it on the board during the second session, which was a little high level. So there were a lot of details included. So I couldn't lead them properly. I couldn't tell them meaningful alternatives. And so I decided to make a second session with them. So that I collected information about their process. I looked a little bit for some alternative measures, and we talked more about their process in more specific details in the second session. And then they were able to design measures that they liked finally. Of course, we had to make some updates during the following sessions, but I think it's normal because they were collecting data for the first time. So I think like these cases that never used measurement before as a facilitator, I should study their processes before. I was feeling more confident and more ready for the session when I knew their processes. And I also studied several potential measures that I can give examples for them to make them better create ideas. So this was my lesson learned from this session.
It's a really good lesson, a very useful one, Ayça, to be able to give some examples to people that have got no experience with something. I think that's often the best way. That the theory might make sense logically, but unless it can come to life in an example that people can relate to, there are some people that will just never be able to understand it. So what you did there with having the second session and having prepared examples for them, I think that was really good learning. All of us can benefit from.
Hopefully.
Okay, so we are going to move up to step 4 in PuMP now for the technical services team, and this is a step we call building buy-in to measures. And we use a measure gallery in step 4 in PuMP. So did your team have a measure gallery, Ayça, and what happened?
Yes, actually we organized one common measure gallery for both teams. So we scheduled one full day for the activity, and they reserved a large room, their training room, in their factory building. So before the activity, they prepared an invitation brochure to hang on the walls, because most of the blue-collar workers didn't use computer so in their workplace. So they invited everyone to share their results and designed measures. Only the senior management's participation was mandatory, as we always recommend.
I like that a lot. Yeah, you get support that way. When the senior management turn up to a measure gallery, most other people will as well.
Yes. So during the measure gallery, as defined in the measure gallery step of PuMP, we removed the chairs from the room. There were only 2 small tables, and there were sticky notes, feedback surveys, and pen on them only. Also, there were snacks and beverages that they served all day long in a separate table in the room. One team used one side of the wall, and the other team used the other wall. And we hanged their results maps and measure design templates, and we linked them to each other with, you can see in the slides. So which measure was related to which performance result could be seen. So both teams were very excited, and they surprised me because they brought some outputs of their processes in addition to our measure designs to the room, like actual pieces they produced, the equipment they used in the repairing. So they wanted to explain what was going on to their friends in more detail, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised about that. Probably more than half of the factory personnel attended during the day. They visited the gallery. And I let the team members explain what they did themselves. And so we collected a few comments and feedback. Some participants left without giving any feedback though, but that was okay. So total about 50 feedback surveys were filled during the day. And according to the feedback results, most of the personnel said that they understood the measures and they trusted on the projects. They believed that the projects will be beneficial to the factory. But we couldn't obtain many feedback as we required. I don't think some of the people understood what feedback we were talking about, what feedback we were expecting from them. They were talking about their action ideas and problems and how to be solved instead of giving feedback about the measures. Fortunately, we received a few valuable feedbacks about the design measures also, like additional things to consider about the risks of the measures, the scope of the measures, frequency of the measures. And then we gathered the feedback together and implemented the ones that we selected during the measure define session. So this is how we completed our measure gallery step. We did an additional step to come together and elaborate what was said, what the feedback were received, and then we selected the ones that we thought useful for the define session.
Mm-hmm. That's great. One of the things that I think people get a little bit nervous or worried about is that people come to a measure gallery and not all of the feedback's relevant. And one of the examples you mentioned, Ayça, was people were commenting on or giving solutions or actions rather than commenting on the measures. I never worry too much about that happening, particularly when it's the first implementation of PuMP in a workplace. And it's also important why we need to keep going through cycles of PuMP to give everybody a chance to come along. There might be some people that don't really get it until they've seen the third implementation of PuMP to develop some measures, or been to a third or a fourth measure gallery, and that's all okay. So the way you've approached this, the way you made use of the feedback you did get, I think is a really great example of how we ought to be doing this, not getting too hung up on the amount of feedback that's useful or how many people did or didn't understand it. So yeah, I like the way you did this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so shall we go to step 5 now, Ayça?
Okay, let's go.
So step 5 in PuMP is implementing measures. This is a fairly detailed step. This is where we take each measure and really flesh out a lot more details even than we're showing here on the slide. What was the most interesting for you when the teams defined their measures using the measure definition?
Well, we understood that we, even though we designed the measure with some thoughts, we didn't think about many aspects of the measures. There were many tiny details that we need to consider during the define stage. So in the design stage, it was really rough definitions of measures. But in the define stage, we really go into the details, and we understood that we didn't really consider much during the design stage. And so we had to make many changes to the definitions, including the formula, the scope, the frequency during this step. And in production, actually, we had to change the definition several times in the later steps when we started to collect the actual data. So I can say that it is not easy to think all the assumptions, the possible assumptions about the measure in the design, even in the define stage, because it's some things really vague when you talk about them in theory, but in practice, when it comes to practice, you realize the actual things about collecting a measure. So the production team had to change their data collection form several times. Not only the definition, but they had to change the collection form to collect the data that we wanted as we intended to collect them. So I think it's very nice to have a template like PuMP has, where we can define that we can consider, that we can think about a measure like where the measure fits, the calculation methods, the presentation methods, the formula, the frequency, the scope, and I mean every heading is really well taught, and this leads the session really well, and we keep focused. But even though there's a good template, there may sometimes be things left outside which can be captured during the actual data collection step.
Yeah, that's an important point, I think. And I've just moved to the next slide, which shows an example of how the measure definition plans out the data items. And this was from your example with the technical services team, Ayça. But it's completely normal, I think, that it's not until we've started collecting the data that we find out what's possible, what isn't possible, what's going to work better. So that's great. That's a principle of PuMP, is that each step helps you get to the next one, but very often the next step helps you refine what you did in the step before. So it's a good example of that. Okay, so step 6 is where we go to next, because by now in PuMP generally we have data ready for our measures, and we want to start looking at that data. And so in step 6 is when we start interpreting signals from our measures, and we use a particular type of control chart or process behavior chart that's called an XMR chart. So Ayça, did your teams create XMR charts for their measures, and how did that go for them?
Yes, we did a actually very long session. I mean, by long, I mean full in details. At the beginning of the 6th session, I gave them a detailed orientation about the XMR charts and how to interpret them, because they were seeing a chart like this for the first time. Then together we created their first charts with their own data. So we had to give them some time to collect the data actually between the 5th and the 6th sessions. And I believe that this session was the one that made them more excited about the project than the previous sessions, because they were able to see their actual performance for the first time on a graph like an XMR chart. And I let them try to interpret their own data according to what they have learned in the beginning of the session. And then we talked about the signals and targets together. For example, for the performance of total service time for deep freeze products measure, they had no signal during 2016 and 17. They were not happy about their performance, and that is why they have chosen this goal for improvement. And seeing the performance on a graph like this had a different impact, I think. For confidentiality reasons, I'm not presenting the actual values of their measure, but you can see that there's no signal and no improvements.
Yeah, there's no signal of change at all. It's just pretty much continuing on the way it has for what looks to be, what would that be, about 18 months worth of time?
2 years time.
Yeah.
It's a quarterly data.
Yeah.
In 2 years time, there were no signals in their service time. Actually, this is why they were actually a little bit above the legal constraints about this measure, so they had to decrease their service time value for a certain level. And seeing this and interpreting their data was really exciting for them. And for the production team, during collecting data, they realized there were some ad hoc points in their process. So this helped them to quickly standardize several aspects of their process before evaluating and interpreting their measures.
Oh, great. Excellent. So they've chosen a measure for a goal that's important to the company. They've created the measure in a way that's meaningful for them. And now they've looked at their measure for the first time in a graph to see what the performance actually is. So now they'll probably want to start using that measure. And in PuMP, we start doing that in step 7, which is reporting performance measures. And it's not just about reporting the XMR chart. It's about taking a closer look at other data as well to help interpret what's going on. So what kind of performance report did you help the measures team create? And maybe could you tell us the story of performance for just one of the measures, Ayça?
Yeah, sure. We created actually an operation level report because this was an operation level goal, and the report would be sent to only technical service manager and the technical service team. And to do this, we used PuMP's reporting templates. So for a little help, I linked their datasheet with the report for a little automation, and we created a dashboard to summarize their 4 measures defined. And we also had detail pages for each measure. For 2 of their measures, no historical data could be collected, so only written a note about this and we moved on. Maybe I can continue with the same example. Before that, as a brief note, I think cascading a process level result to the activity level is the first step of the root cause analysis. So this story has to be visible in the performance report, I think. So in our case, the process level result was to decrease the time spent for technical service of deep freeze products. During cascading, they said that being have to bring the product to the factory increased the service time the most, and they as compared to other factors. So in the detail page of the total service time, first we put the XMR chart, and then the details of which factors affected the time of this technical service was put, as you see in the slide here. Which factors affect the most are prioritized, and the one that has the most effect is highlighted in the graph. We did this with the Pareto chart, as you see. The actual values are hidden, but the highlighted one can be clearly seen. So this reference of the 2 measures are established in the report. So this is actually what they put as an activity level goal, to give the service at the customer site, not to bring it to the factory. Then in the recommendation section, we refer to the solution found during the root cause analysis session of the activity. And of course, this section of this report was filled after the 8th session, not in the reporting session, but we just give the headings in the 7th session.
Yeah.
To summarize the whole story, the factor that most affects the service time was identified as being how to bring the product to the factory. So they wanted to be able to provide customer technical service at the customer site. So during the root cause analysis session, the cause of being have to bring the product to the factory was highlighted as being have to change the whole compartment when there's a problem in the cooling evaporator, which was the most frequent case for these deep freeze products. So they just couldn't change the compartment at the customer site, and they found a solution at the 8th session, and we reported these in the performance report so that the reader can understand the story and can visualize the cause and effect link from the report while reading as a manager to see the whole story in one page.
That's it. And you've pointed out, Ayça, that really when we are doing step 7 in PuMP, we can't often finish it until we've done step 8, where we've looked a little more closely at causes and actually tried a solution to see if it's going to work. And so step 7 and step 8 in PuMP naturally kind of fit together and will become the new ongoing process of monitoring a particular measure. So that was a really worthwhile thing to point out. So let's take a closer look at step 8 then.
Okay.
Which is reaching performance targets. It's the final step in PuMP. Did your measures team find an improvement that they could try for the measure that you've been showing us?
Yes, as I told you before, the root cause was identified as not being able to change the evaporator at the customer side. So they had to bring the whole product to the factory, and which was the most frequent case. So when searching for action items, they thought about changing the design of the product a little bit so that they will be able to change the evaporator at the customer side without have to bring it to the factory. So they quickly talked with the production team whether if it's possible or not. And they said that it was possible. It was not a hard step to do. So they decided to make this happen. So the action they took was to change the design of the product to enable only cooling evaporator can be changed at the customer side. So as a result, this would make by improving the orange layer performance result, they are thinking to increase their improve their technical service time and their also cost, because bringing the product to the factory was really costly. It increased the time, both time and cost of the whole process. So this was the action item that they decided on, and in the visual you see that we linked the action item to the activity level performance result, and this way the linkage to the other performance results can be seen from this graph.
I like it when we add our actions to the results map. It does a couple of things. It does exactly what you've described, Ayça, where it shows how when we do this action, like in this rectangle here, then this activity level result will improve, and the improvement of that activity level result will then cause a flow-on improvement to the blue or the process level result. So it shows that logic really clearly and tells more of the story about performance. The other thing I like about putting actions on the results map is that for those people that are very action oriented, that don't understand results very well and only can think easily about actions, and I think you mentioned some of those people were at the measure gallery for the technical services team. This helps them see the distinction. It helps them see that actions are different from results and they have a relationship, but we need to think about both, not just about the actions. So I love that. I think that's a really great diagram that you've done.
Thank you. And I think they're starting to see the results. I didn't get their data yet, but I asked them how's it going. So they said that they measured actually for 2 quarters, and they see the real potential improvements. It's early to speak. There's only 2 data points, but it seems the results are near to the lower control limit, and that's something they can celebrate if it continues.
Yeah, in fact, if the new results are closer to the lower limit in the XMR chart, they only need 1 more quarter that's that low, and they can be very convinced that they've made an improvement. And that would be in what we call in XMR chart signals a short run. That would be really exciting.
Yes, I'm talking about the service time, of course.
Yes,
they're decreasing their service time, actually.
Brilliant. Okay, and for the production team, any notes about about them?
For the production team, they were able to test their potential improvements, action items that were their advantage because they are the production team. They manufacture pieces as they want for the project, and they could observe the results quickly. So they had a set of alternative action items, and they selected the ones that promised beneficial results by testing their actual results. So this delayed our project a little bit because I gave them some time to test and decide on their actions. So when the eighth session was completed, after a few weeks later, we completed the pilot, so they could actually decide on which action items to implement for their team. And so we closed the pilots with a final evaluation with the whole team and the senior management, and we went over their action items selected, their cascaded performance results, and how it will be monitored and tracked, and how the signals will be implemented. And they explained the inputs and outputs of the projects to their managers. And it was a really good session, I think, for a closure. And we yes, and we diagnosis session. We repeated the diagnostic session in that closure meeting.
So two things come to mind, Ayça. One is that it sounds like the production team, because they've gotten that far, they've gotten through the 8 steps of PuMP and have chosen some improvement actions to do. That's great. That means that they stayed engaged the whole way and know a lot more about measurement now than they used to when they started, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
And were you mentioning the second thing? Were you mentioning that you did the diagnostic with them again at the end?
Yes. So in order to evaluate before and after the pilots, what they think has improved and what they understood better, what they saw better. So we repeated the diagnostic session. And we saw that several aspects were improved, but of course it was not a full implementation throughout the factory. So they gave, again, honest scores and what they think would be useful and how it should be implemented in the factory in the coming months. So it was a really beneficial session for the senior management to understand the projects and what to expect from the outcomes of the projects, and when to expect the outcomes of the projects. So it was really a nice session.
That's lovely. I don't often hear people bringing the diagnostic into the end of a PuMP implementation, but you've just made the case for why it's such a useful thing to do. Excellent. Okay. Well, they're the 8 steps of PuMP and how you facilitated 2 teams at the factory to do that. And it sounds like both of them have learned a lot and also achieved a lot as well as a team and for the company, which is great. So do you, Ayça, now have any particular words of wisdom that you would like to share with others about PuMP?
Well, it was my first implementation, but I can say that PuMP is a really well-thought process and completes the loop of a process improvement cycle, starting after the strategic goals are set at the organization. It's practical, and its practical steps make it easy to be understood and implemented by any kind of audience. And it's very normal to make rework to the initial outputs, so progressing with 80 to 20 rule really makes sense, and we did this a lot in my projects. Some steps need additional elaborations, I think, and they become clear throughout the practical implementation, and I'm sure it will improve with experience. Like, for example, flow charting, doing performance cascading to the activity level, or how to use the root cause analysis tools like fishbone diagrams, Pareto charts, other statistical tools, correlation analysis, process performance modeling maybe, or detailed process improvement techniques like implemented controlled experiments selecting among potential actions, how to select, how to make the cost-benefit analysis, etc. So you may need to choose among alternative detailed methods depending on the case at hand and the level of the goal you are dealing with. For example, now I'm leading a full PuMP implementation, and it's really different for the strategic level goals with what we did at the operation level goals, because no real action items are coming at the strategic level. You need to cascade them to the activities. Yeah. And the maturity of the organization, of course, really impacts this. So somehow the way to achieve real improvements that align to your strategic goals, and at the end being able to prove those improvements by measuring, I think is the true value added by PuMP, and what should be evaluated, what should be thought about, and should be made more deep and useful to the organization. So I really had great time during these pilots, and I learned a lot during these pilots. So I wish I can increase my knowledge and experience in time about this.
I think you absolutely will, Ayça. One of the unique things that you bring to PuMP through the way you implement it is clearly you've got that strong background in statistics, so data is something that's very comfortable and easy to you, and you can help other people understand it and make the most out of it. And the process improvement side of your skill set as well, I think, adds a lot to helping people understand how PuMP fits in with their everyday work. So you've got a really great combination of skills that I think complement PuMP brilliantly, and have probably very likely part of the reason why you've been as successful as you have. And this is the first time that you and I have spoken. Like, we've emailed a lot, but we haven't spoken before. And being able to hear you talk and to tell the story of this and pick up some of those nuances in the way you speak about it, I imagine that you're a brilliant facilitator, and you make it very easy for people to contribute and to share and to feel okay. You don't expect them to be right or to be clever. You don't push them. You kind of invite them and hold the space for them to really take ownership of it. So that is another skill that I think is really important when we're bringing a complex change like performance measurement to people, especially when they haven't used it before. So congratulations on bringing all of your skills and expertise and brilliance together, and for using PuMP and making it turn out so well for these teams you worked with. Thank you, Ayça.
I thank you. It was a really good pleasure for me for both doing this and talking to you also.
Excellent. So there may very well be some listeners that would like to reach out to you. So you've very kindly shared some of your contact information with them, and I have a slide there. But Ayça, if you wouldn't mind just sharing maybe your website and your email address, just in case there are people who are listening to this in their car and not able to see the slides.
Okay. Do. So you can reach me from my email address is ayca@promeas.org. And www.promeas.org is my website for my freelance company. So you can reach me via these media.
Thank you, Ayça. That's wonderful. Everyone, Ayça has also very kindly written up full case studies, documented case studies of the stories that she shared with us today. And for those of you who are members of our PuMP community, you'll be able to download those and learn even more from Ayça and what she has shared with us today through those experiences. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you about this, Ayça, so thank you again for being so generous with your time and sharing so much of your experience, including the things that you've learned along the way. It's an incredibly valuable thing for other PuMP users to learn from, so thank you very much.
I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk and share my knowledge. and it's really my pleasure to be on this team, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.